Have you ever watched a baby suck its thumb repeatedly? Or seen a child genuinely believe the moon is following them? That systematic, fundamental shift in how we think and understand reality is the core of Jean Piaget's theory of cognitive development. Piaget argued that children are constructivists. This means that they are like active little scientists who move through 4 universal stages, constantly building and restructuring their knowledge. Their thinking doesn't just get better, it becomes qualitatively different. Today, we're exploring these 4 stages and the powerful internal processes that drive this lifelong change. Before we get started, let us go over the key principles. Piaget viewed cognitive growth as a product of a child's efforts to adapt to their environment. This process is governed by 3 interrelated principles: organization, adaptation, and equilibration. Organization. This is the natural human tendency to group isolated behaviors and thoughts into a higher order system. We build mental structures called schemes, or schemata, which are organized patterns of thought and behavior that guide our interaction with the world. For example, a baby's innate grasping scheme, or a toddler's mental animal scheme, which guides their behavior towards automatically grasping something or automatically recognizing a creature. Adaptation. This is how we handle new information in light of existing schemes. This is broken down into 2 parts: assimilation, incorporating new information into an existing scheme without changing the scheme itself. For example, a child who only encountered small dogs suddenly sees a larger dog and calls it a dog, successfully fitting it into the existing scheme. Accommodation. Accommodation is adjusting or altering an existing scheme to fit new information that cannot be assimilated. For example, a child encounters a horse for the very first time. Since it looks like a dog, as it has 4 legs, and has a mouth and 2 eyes, and so on, the child calls it a dog. However, they were corrected by their caregiver, telling them that that is a horse. Now the child must accommodate their dog scheme by creating a new separate scheme for this new creature, aka the horse. Lastly, equilibration. Equilibration is the internal regulatory mechanism that balances assimilation and accommodation. Children constantly seek equilibrium. This is a state of cognitive balance where their understanding of the world matches what they observe. This can be broken down into this process. When a child encounters something new that their current schemes can explain, they utilize assimilation to reach equilibrium. For example, like the previous example where the child encountered a large dog and fit it into their schema of dogs. But when a child encounters something new that their current schemes cannot explain, for example, seeing a new creature which looks like a dog but is called a horse, they experience cognitive conflict called disequilibrium. This mismatch forces them to accommodate their thinking. For example, they think to themselves, while a horse also has 4 feet, it is much larger and has a longer tail than a dog. They then create a new schema for the horse which fits this criteria. This adjustment leads to a more logical, stable understanding, establishing a new equilibrium and driving the child from one cognitive stage of development to the next. Now, let's get started on the stages. The first stage is sensorimotor stage, which starts approximately from birth to 2 years. The sensorimotor stage is where infants learn about the world entirely through their senses and motor actions, and so their thinking is tied to their physical activities. Learning is based on sensory exploration and the development of motor skills. In this stage, the infant lacks any mental representation. At the end of the stage, however, the infant has the major achievement of object permanence. This is the understanding that objects continue to exist even when they are out of sight. Development in this stage is a gradual refinement process that Piaget detailed across 6 substages of circular reactions. The first substage is the use of reflexes. This occurs from birth to the first month. Infants exercise their inborn reflexes and gain control over them. For example, they are practicing sucking on anything that touches their mouth. The next stage is primary circular reactions. This occurs between 1 to 4 months. The infant repeats behaviors focused on their own body that they find pleasurable. For example, repeatedly bringing their hand to their mouth and sucking their thumb. The next stage is secondary circular reactions. This occurs between 4 to 8 months. The infant shifts focus to the external environment, repeating actions that create interesting results outside their body. For example, a child kicking the toy to make it shake, and doing it again to repeat the effect. The next stage is the coordination of secondary schemes. This occurs between 8 to 12 months. Infants coordinate multiple previously learned schemes to achieve a specific goal-directed behavior. In this substage, object permanence is fully achieved. For example, pushing a toy block out of the way to grab a desired toy underneath. The next substage is tertiary circular reactions. This occurs between 12 to 18 months. Toddlers show intense curiosity and experimentation, using trial and error by purposefully varying their actions to see new results. For example, testing what happens when they throw food, not just straight down, but off to the side or up in the air. Finally, the last substage is mental combinations. This occurs between 18 to 24 months. The transition to the next stage occurs as the child begins to form mental representations, also known as symbolic representation. They can now anticipate consequences without physical action, deferred imitation, or imitation that occurs after one has seen the reaction of another individual towards a certain situation, and the surge in language use are a clear indicators of this transition from the sensorimotor stage to the next stage, which is the pre-operational stage. As stated, the second stage is the pre-operational stage, which starts approximately from 2 to 7 years. The pre-operational stage is marked by the emergence of symbolic thought, as mentioned in the final substage of the sensorimotor stage. Symbolic thought is the ability to use words and images to mentally represent concepts. This allows for rich pretend play where they can mentally represent and act out roles, such as pretending to be an astronaut or nurse. This stage is marked by multiple key limitations, the first of which is lack of operations or logical rules. In this stage, thinking is intuitive, dominated by how things look and contains key flaws. The next key limitation is egocentrism. This is the inability to see things from another person's perspective. For example, a child insists you can see the picture book they are holding, even though it's covering their face and facing them. The next key limitation is centration. This is the tendency to focus only on one aspect of a situation while neglecting others. For example, only focusing on the height of the water in a glass, ignoring its width. Another key limitation is irreversibility. This is the failure to understand that an action can be mentally reversed. Due to centration and irreversibility, they fail to understand conservation. Conservation is the idea that quantity, mass, or volume is unchanged by alterations in appearance. For example, a child cannot realize that if you inflate a balloon, you can deflate it back to its original state. Finally, the last key limitation is animism. This is the tendency to attribute life, feelings, and intentions to inanimate objects. For example, a child blames the rock for making them trip, saying the rock is mean. The third stage is the concrete operational stage, which begins approximately from 7 to 11 years. In the concrete operational stage, the child has achieved the logical rules or operations necessary to think rationally. Their thinking is organized and systematic, but still tied to concrete events, such as physical objects and real-world situations. And so the key achievement in this stage is logical thought and decentration. Children in this stage can now decenter, which means they can think about several aspects of a situation at one time, solving problems logically. They can also now showcase the ability of conservation. Having fully attained conservation, they can now utilize reversibility, which is mentally reversing the action, and understand the principle of identity, knowing that the item is still the same with just one property of it having been changed. For example, a balloon is still a balloon whether it is inflated or deflated. The next key achievement is seriation. This is the ability to arrange objects in a series according to one or more measurable dimensions. For example, arranging a set of different sized dolls from shortest to tallest. The next key achievement is transitivity, or transitive inference. This is the ability to understand the relationship between two objects by knowing the relationship of each to a third object. For example, if item A is heavier than item B and item B is heavier than item C, then item A must be heavier than item C. Another key achievement is class inclusion. This is the ability to see the relationship between a whole and its parts, understanding that an object belongs to multiple categories. For example, realizing that a tulip is a flower and a flower is also a plant, thereby acknowledging subcategories within a larger category. Finally, inductive reasoning. Children in this stage primarily use logic that moves from specific observation to a general conclusion. Finally, the fourth and last stage is the formal operational stage, which begins approximately from 11 years and continues beyond. The final stage, the formal operational, marks the capacity for abstract thought. This is thinking that is no longer tied to physical objects or events. The key achievement in this stage is hypothetico-deductive reasoning. This is the methodical, scientific approach to problem solving that involves the ability to develop, consider, and systematically test hypotheses. For example, when a formal operational thinker faces a broken item, they'll systematically rule out possibilities. Their thinking would probably sound like this. If the switch is broken, then the power is fine. But if the bulb is dead, then that means the switch is fine. Essentially, they are ruling out different possibilities in order to solve a specific situation. The next key achievement is abstract concepts. They can reason about hypothetical or what-if scenarios and complex concepts that are not directly experienced, such as ethics, morality, justice, and faith. Finally, deductive reasoning. They gain the ability to use logic that moves from a general premise to a specific conclusion. A common example of this is, if it is raining, the ground is wet. And it is currently raining, therefore the ground is wet. In summary, development is a systematic journey propelled by equilibration, moving from the action-based sensorimotor stage through the symbolic but flawed pre-operational stage, the stable concrete logic of the concrete operational stage, and finally the powerful abstract reasoning of the formal operational stage. Which stage's limitation did you find most revealing about childhood thinking? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into developmental psychology. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye bye!